The sun had barely risen over the quiet village of Shadapur, casting a golden hue across the fields that once fed hundreds. But today those fields stood silent, dry, cracked, forgotten. The wind whispered through the barren land, brushing past broken fences and rusted tools that had long since stopped being used. In the distance, a lone figure moved slowly between the rows of what used to be lush crops. His name was Hamid, a farmer, a father, a man who once held the earth in his hands with pride. But now, he walked with a heavy heart and a burden no one seemed to notice anymore. Hamid had worked this land for over 40 years. Rain or shine, he never missed a morning in the fields. His hands were tough, his back bent from decades of toil. Yet he never complained. Farming was in his blood. It had fed his parents, his children, and for many years even the local market. But everything changed when the canal dried up 2 years ago. At first, he thought it was temporary, just another season of bad luck. But the water never returned. Government promises came and went, along with empty slogans and half-hearted visits from officials. Hamid held on, believing in the land, believing in hope. But hope, like water, was slowly running out. His neighbors had already left. Some sold their land to private companies. Others abandoned it, choosing city life over the endless wait for rain. But Hamid stayed. Not because he was stubborn, but because this land was his identity. His wife, Sajida, had begged him to move, especially after their youngest son, Bilal, left for the city in search of work. But Hamid couldn't let go. Every corner of the field held a memory. Of laughter, of struggle, of life. To leave it behind would be like burying a part of himself. Sajida, too, had changed. Once lively and full of energy, she now spent her days sitting by the window, watching the horizon with silent prayers on her lips. Their home, once filled with the smell of fresh roti and the laughter of children, had grown eerily quiet. Bills piled up, the roof leaked during rain, and at night, the silence grew louder than the crickets. Yet no one came to ask how they were doing. No one knocked on their door. It was as if they had been erased from the map. One afternoon, as Hamid sat under the old neem tree, wiping sweat from his forehead, a young man approached. He wore city clothes and carried a sleek black folder in his hand. "Are you Hamid Sahib?" he asked, almost too politely. Hamid nodded. The man smiled, introduced himself as a Svan from a development company, and began to talk about an offer, a generous one, for the land. He spoke of progress, of malls, of modern housing. "It's a chance to start fresh," he said. But to Hamid, it sounded like a final nail in the coffin. That night, Hamid sat on the charpai, staring at the folder a Svan had left behind. Sajida looked at him without saying a word, but her eyes were filled with questions. Could they really survive another year like this? Could they afford to say no? The next morning, something unexpected happened. Hamid found a small patch of green near the far end of the field. Just a few blades of grass, stubbornly pushing through the cracked soil. He knelt beside them, touching them gently, almost afraid they would disappear. It felt like the land was speaking to him, telling him not to give up. That same afternoon, a young girl from the village school came by with a notebook. She said her teacher had asked the students to learn about local farmers, and she chose Hamid. "I want to know your story," she said innocently. It was the first time in years that someone had asked. He invited her to sit, and for the first time in a long while, Hamid spoke, not about loss but about dreams. He talked about the days when the fields were green, about the harvest festivals, about the time his eldest son climbed the mango tree and fell laughing into a pile of hay. The girl listened, wide-eyed, writing down every word. Before she left, she looked up at him and said, "You're a hero. My father left farming. But you stayed." Those words hit Hamid harder than any drought ever could. He wasn't a forgotten farmer. Not yet. Not if someone still saw him. But just as a faint light seemed to return, things took a strange turn. The next day, a Svan came back. Not alone this time. 2 men stood behind him, silent, firm. They weren't from the development company, At least not the way Asfand had described. One of them, a tall man with a scar above his eyebrow, kept looking at the house as if measuring it. Asfand's tone had changed too. The friendly smile was gone. "We hope you'll reconsider our offer," he said, placing a new folder on the table, thicker than the last. "It's better to agree now. Things move fast in progress." Something didn't feel right. Sajida gripped Hamid's arm as they watched the men leave, their car kicking up dust on the empty road. That night, Hamid locked the gates, something he hadn't done in years. The next morning, the blades of grass he had found were gone. Not just dried, gone as if they'd never existed. And near the neem tree, he noticed strange tire marks. Someone had been there, but for what? Later that evening, as Hamid sat in silence, a letter arrived. There was no name on it, just a warning. "Sell now, before it's too late." He looked around. The wind had stopped. The sky had turned a pale orange. Sajida stood at the door, calling his name with worry in her voice. But Hamid couldn't move. His land was still whispering, but the message had changed. What was once a silent struggle was now turning into something far more dangerous. And what happens next will shock you. Hamid couldn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the table like a silent threat, its words echoing louder in his mind with every passing hour. "Sell now, before it's too late." Who had sent it? Why now? And what exactly was the danger? The village had always been quiet, peaceful. Even during the hardest droughts, the people stuck together. But now, something felt wrong, like a shadow slowly crawling over the land. Sajida brought him a cup of tea just before sunrise. She didn't say much, but her eyes carried the same unease that had crept into their home. She looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from years of watching her husband fight a battle he seemed destined to lose. "Maybe we should go see Bilal," she whispered. "Just for a few days." Hamid nodded slowly but didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere, going over every moment from the past few weeks. The sudden interest in his land, the change in Asfand's tone, the faceless men, and now the letter. None of it made sense. His land wasn't worth much anymore. It hadn't produced a decent crop in years. Why were they so desperate to buy it? Later that morning, he visited an old friend, Bashir, a retired schoolteacher who lived at the edge of the village. Bashir had always kept up with the news and had a sharp eye for things others missed. Hamid shared everything with him. The visit from the men, the letter, the missing grass, even the tire marks. Bashir sat quietly, rubbing his white beard. "There's something happening around here, Hamid," he said after a long pause. "You're not the only one who's received pressure to sell. 3 families left last month. All said the same thing. Offers that turned into warnings. And not a word from them since. It's like they disappeared." Hamid felt a chill crawl down his spine. "But why my land? Why now?" Bashir leaned forward. "I've heard whispers. There's talk that a big company wants to build something here. Not just homes, something larger. Industrial. Maybe a highway connection. It's all hush-hush, but those who resist, they're pushed out." That evening, Hamid returned home feeling heavier than before. Sajida met him at the door with a worried look. "Someone came asking for you," she said. A woman. Said her name was Saba. She didn't say much, just asked about the land. And then she left. Hamid blinked. The name rang a faint bell, but he couldn't place it. "Did she leave anything?" Sajida shook her head. "Just looked around and left quickly. Said she might come back." Hamid stood quietly, trying to make sense of it all. Just a week ago no one cared about his land. Now everyone seemed to be watching it. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he went back out to the edge of the fields, near the old neem tree. That's when he noticed it. A small piece of cloth caught on the fence, as if someone had been there recently. He picked it up. It looked like part of a scarf, deep maroon in color. Nearby, the tire marks were still visible, fresher now, almost like someone had returned. The next morning brought more strange signs. Hamid found his water tank nearly empty, though he'd just filled it the day before. One of the windows in the tool shed was broken, yet nothing was taken. Sajida noticed the hens were unusually quiet, hiding in corners instead of wandering freely. Even the village dogs barked more than usual that night, chasing after shadows that vanished before anyone could see clearly. Still, Hamid tried to carry on. He repaired the shed window, filled the tank again, and told Sajida not to worry. But deep inside, he knew something had changed. He felt watched, followed. And worse, he didn't know who to trust anymore. That afternoon, Saba returned. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, dressed plainly but with sharp, focused eyes. She introduced herself again and asked if she could speak to Hamid in private. They sat under the neem tree, where the breeze was still cool and the memory of those missing grass blades lingered. "I work with an organization that tracks illegal land development," she said. "You're in danger, Hamid Sahib. This area is part of a larger scheme. They've been buying land through pressure and threats. And when that doesn't work, they resort to worse." Hamid looked at her, skeptical. "But why? Just dry land. We haven't had a good harvest in years." Saba nodded. "That's what they want you to believe. But beneath your land runs a water channel, an old one sealed decades ago. It could change the entire irrigation pattern of this region if revived. They want it for commercial use, not for farming. And they're trying to make sure no local farmer stands in their way." Hamid's heart raced. He remembered his father mentioning a hidden canal, something built by the British but never fully mapped. Could it really be under his land? He'd never seen any signs of it. But if what Saba said was true, then the stakes were far higher than he imagined. Saba warned him to be careful. "They'll come again. They don't like delays. And if they think you know too much, they won't just ask nicely anymore." Before she left, she handed him a small device. "It's a recorder. Use it if they come back. Get proof. You're not alone, but you'll need to be smart." That night, Hamid didn't sleep. He kept the recorder close and sat near the window with a lantern glowing beside him. Sajida tried to rest but was startled awake by every sound. Hours passed, but the silence felt heavier than usual, almost pressing down on their small home like a weight. Around 2 a.m., Hamid heard it, the sound of footsteps outside, soft but steady. He stood, careful not to make noise, and peered through the curtain. There, near the fence, were two figures, moving slowly, checking something on the ground. One of them pointed toward the house. Hamid reached for the recorder with trembling fingers. But before he could turn it on, the figures turned sharply and vanished into the darkness as if they knew they'd been seen. The next morning, he found the fence had been cut near the back corner, just wide enough for someone to slip through. A fresh set of tire tracks led away from the house, and near the neem tree, the soil had been disturbed, as if someone had tried to dig. Hamid stood over the spot, heart pounding. Was this where the hidden canal began? Was this what they were after all along? He looked out over the field, dry, cracked, forgotten. But now he saw it differently. It wasn't useless land. It was something far more valuable. And someone would stop at nothing to take it. The silent struggle of a forgotten farmer was no longer just about survival. It was about truth. And the danger was only beginning. In the days that followed, the air around Hamid's farm seemed to thicken with tension. He tried to work like usual, checking the broken fence, tending to what little grew near the neem tree, but every rustle of wind or sudden noise set his nerves on edge. He had lived on this land for decades, had weathered droughts, storms, even personal losses, but this was something different. This was invisible and silent, creeping into his life with no name or face. And the worst part was, no one else in the village was talking about it. At the tea stall near the mosque, Hamid listened as other farmers discussed market prices, rain predictions, and how many had sold their land to new buyers. When he asked about the pressure or threats, the conversation would go quiet. Some would change the subject. Others just looked away. It was clear they were afraid. Meanwhile, Sajida noticed more signs of being watched. A motorcycle would sometimes idle near the far end of their lane at odd hours, its rider pretending to check his phone. Strangers asked strange questions in the village. About land records, about Hamid's family, about whether anyone had visited from outside. She didn't feel safe anymore, especially when Hamid had to go to town. To keep her mind busy, Sajida began cleaning out an old storage trunk. It hadn't been opened in years, tucked away in a dusty corner of the house. Inside were faded photos, yellowed documents, and a torn map that caught her eye. It was hand-drawn, possibly by Hamid's late father, and showed parts of the farm marked with circles and notes in Urdu. One note, smudged but still legible, read, Nihar ki Rayahansa Guzarti Hai. The canal path passes through here. She waited until Hamid returned that evening and showed him the map. He stared at it in disbelief, tracing the lines with a shaking finger. This was more than a rumor now. His land wasn't just valuable for farming. It was a key location, hiding something old and forgotten beneath the soil. Something someone wanted to uncover. Quietly. But the question was, who? Hamid decided to visit the land registry office in the nearby town, hoping to find old records, maps, or anything confirming the canal's path. There, he met a clerk named Faraz, a kind man in his 40s who seemed a bit too quick to offer help. Many people asking about that area these days, Faraz said, flipping through files. Your land's been flagged for development. Big project. Highway access, factories, maybe even an energy plant. Government partnership, they say. Hamid frowned. And they didn't tell us. The people who live there. Faraz shrugged, avoiding his eyes. Sometimes these things move fast. You know how it is. But when Hamid asked for a copy of the original land survey records, Faraz hesitated. They're missing, he finally said. Disappeared a few months ago. That night, Hamid met with Saba again. They sat in the back of a small roadside eatery, away from listening ears. He told her about the map, about Faraz, and how people in the village were growing more distant, more afraid. Saba looked troubled. This isn't just about land, she said quietly. It's about control. If they control the water, they control everything, irrigation, development, even migration. Your land is sitting on something they don't want the public to know exists. That's why they're being so aggressive. She handed Hamid a flash drive. It has satellite images, company names, some internal memos we intercepted. You'll see they've already begun digging on land nearby. Quietly. No permits, no environmental clearance. And now they're closing in on yours. Hamid held the flash drive as if it weighed a ton. He wasn't a man of computers or files, but he understood one thing. This wasn't just a personal fight anymore. If he lost his land, they wouldn't just bury his story. They'd erase the truth. Back at home, Sajida began noticing other strange things. Their electricity would flicker at night, though the rest of the village had no issues. A window latch had been broken in the kitchen, but nothing was missing. And one evening, she saw someone standing by the neem tree just after dusk, too far to recognize, but close enough to know they weren't there by accident. Bilal, their youngest son, finally called after weeks of silence. Hamid hesitated, then told him everything. There was a long pause on the phone. Then Bilal said, Baba, come stay with me. You don't have to fight this alone. But Hamid wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. They want us to run, he said. That's what they expect. If we go, they win. What Hamid didn't know was that Bilal, troubled by what his father told him, began digging himself. Through a friend in local journalism, he found whispers of a construction company with deep political connections, buying land under fake names, changing records, and using security firms to negotiate with villagers. The more he read, the clearer it became. This was a land grab hiding behind the mask of development. A silent war on people like his father. Honest, hardworking, invisible. A few nights later, the threat became more direct. A rock was thrown through the window around midnight, shattering glass and silence. Sajida screamed, and Hamid rushed out with a lantern, but whoever did it was already gone. Tied to the rock was a note. "Time's up." The next morning, Sajida insisted they go to the police. But at the station, the officer barely looked up. "Must be local kids. Nothing serious. You're wasting our time." His tone made it clear they weren't welcome. On their way back, a neighbor named Ilias caught up with them quietly. He was a soft-spoken man who had always kept to himself. "Be careful," he warned in a low voice. "Some of them in the station. They're working with the same people who want your land." The trap was closing in. Hamid and Sajida were surrounded, not just by strangers, but by people they once trusted. The system that was supposed to protect them was part of the pressure now. Even the soil beneath their feet had turned uncertain, solid yet hiding secrets. That evening, Hamid walked alone to the neem tree and sat in silence. He looked over his land, cracked and dry, but still his. He thought of his children, of his father's stories, of the map now hidden under his pillow. He knew the conflict was no longer just about one farmer holding on to his past. It was about whether people like him still mattered. And the answer, he feared, would come very soon. The days that followed felt like a storm waiting to break. The wind howled louder at night, carrying with it the whispers of things left unsaid. Hamid moved through his daily routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every knock on the door felt like a warning. Every unfamiliar sound outside pulled him to the window, holding his breath. Even Sajida, who had always been his strength, began packing little things quietly, just in case they had to leave in a hurry. Bilal called again. This time his voice was urgent. "I've been digging into the company's records. There's a shell firm, Al Noor Development Project. It's fake, but it's backed by real investors, big names. Some of them have ties to government contracts. They've already purchased most of the land around yours. Yours is the last piece they need." Hamid's fingers tightened around the phone. "Then that's why they're pushing so hard," he said quietly. "Yes," Bilal replied. "And they're getting nervous. There's a leak. Someone on the inside is talking to a journalist. They know it. You're in the middle of something much bigger than you realize." That same night, a power outage plunged the entire house into darkness. Sajida lit a lantern, but Hamid told her to put it out. He had a feeling they weren't alone. Outside, footsteps moved slowly near the fence. The faint crunch of gravel under a heavy boot. The soft click of something metallic. He stayed still, holding the recorder in one hand, heart thumping in his chest. Then a voice from the darkness. Firm. "You're out of time, Hamid Sahib. Sign the papers. Or face the consequences." The voice was familiar. Too familiar. Hamid waited until the steps faded before speaking. "That was a Sfand," he whispered to Sajida. "I'm sure of it." Sajida's eyes widened. "But why would he?" "He's part of it," Hamid said. "He was never just the messenger. He's working with them." The betrayal hit hard. A Sfand had eaten at their table, laughed with their children, acted like a brother. Now he was just another face behind the pressure. Another shadow in the dark. Hamid met with Bashir again the next morning, showing him the audio he had recorded. Bashir listened quietly, then nodded. "You need to make this public. Go to the press. If this story gets out, they'll back off, at least until people start asking questions." But the challenge was getting it out safely. That night, Saba returned unexpectedly, her face pale and her hands shaking. "They know about the journalist. He's disappeared. No one's heard from him since yesterday." She handed Hamid a folded paper. "This is your map. Keep it safe. You were right, it lines up with the old survey records. The water channel runs directly beneath your land. That's why they're so desperate." "What do I do now?" Hamid asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hold the line," she said. "Don't sign. We're gathering more proof. Once we have everything, we'll release it together. But until then, you're in danger." The pressure became unbearable. More letters came, some placed under their door, others stuck to the fence. They stopped pretending to be polite. "You're standing in the way of progress," one note said. "And no one will remember you when you're gone." But Hamid didn't give in. Every morning, he stood at the edge of his land, eyes scanning the horizon. Every evening he checked the recorder, the windows, the fence. Sajida slept with one eye open, clutching a small bag of essentials under the bed. The village, once warm and close, began to shift. Neighbors avoided eye contact. A few even crossed the street when they saw Hamid coming. One old friend whispered, "They're watching us too. If we talk to you, we could lose everything." And still Hamid stayed. Then came the night of the storm. Rain had been promised all week, and when it finally came, it didn't come gently. Thunder cracked across the sky. Wind tore through the trees. The neem branches bent like they might break. Sajida begged Hamid to stay inside, but something about the wind called him to the field. That's when he saw the lights. 2 vehicles parked near the far end, where the fence had been cut again. Men in dark raincoats, moving with purpose. They weren't just here to scare him now. They were here to do something permanent. He crouched behind the shed, heart pounding, recorder in hand. He couldn't see their faces clearly, but their voices carried. "We dig tonight. Clear the soil. Find the tunnel entrance. If he shows up, handle it." Lightning lit up the sky for a second, revealing a machine, small but powerful, set up to break through the earth. Hamid's land wasn't just valuable. It was hiding an entry point to the underground waterway. A hidden access that had been untouched for decades. As he turned to sneak back to the house, a branch cracked underfoot. One of the men turned. "Who's there?" Flashlight beams pierced the darkness, slicing through the rain like searchlights. Hamid ran, soaked and slipping, heart hammering in his chest. Behind him, the sound of boots splashing through mud. He reached the house and slammed the door shut. Sajida screamed as he bolted it. The lights flickered on for just a second, long enough for them to see movement outside the window. Then darkness again. "This is it," Hamid whispered. "They're not backing off." He handed Sajida the map and the flash drive. "If anything happens to me, give this to Bilal. He'll know what to do." She grabbed his hand. "We're not going anywhere without each other." Outside, the storm raged on. Shadows moved around the house. And inside, the fear was real, raw and thick. Because the silent struggle of a forgotten farmer had now become a full-blown standoff. And what happened next would change everything. The wind roared like an angry beast outside, battering the wooden windows and rattling the tin roof. Inside, Hamid stood near the front door, breath heavy, heart racing, listening for every sound. Sajida clutched the flash drive in her hand, refusing to let it go. The rain had turned the yard into thick mud, erasing footprints, but not fear. Somewhere out there, people were trying to dig their way through more than just soil. They were clawing through history, trying to bury the truth before anyone could uncover it. And then, just as the storm reached its peak, the knocking came. But it wasn't harsh or threatening, it was soft, measured, almost hesitant. Hamid held up a hand for silence. Another knock. Then a voice, muffled but clear. "Uncle Hamid, it's me. It's Rafi." The name froze Hamid in place. Rafi was Asfan's younger brother. He had moved to the city a year ago to study and hadn't been seen in the village since. What was he doing here? And why now? Sajida looked at Hamid with wide eyes. "Can we trust him?" "I don't know," Hamid whispered. But he opened the door anyway. Rafi stood soaked to the bone, shivering, his eyes darting over his shoulder. He stepped inside quickly, wiping his face. "They don't know I came. I overheard something at home. Asfand is planning something tonight. They're going to blame you for sabotaging the project. Make it look like you damaged the land, poisoned the well or something. They've already written the report. All they need now is a reason to come in officially and take everything." Hamid stared at him, unsure what to believe. "Why are you telling me this?" Rafi looked down. "Because my brother's changed. He's not the man I knew. He's helping them. But he didn't start it. He was forced into it. They're using him too. Sajida sat down slowly, her mind racing. If they file a false report, we won't just lose the land. We'll be branded as criminals. Ruffy nodded. And then no one will believe anything you say about the canal or the digging. That's their plan. Silence you completely. Just as the words settled in the room, the sound of an engine cut through the rain outside. Then another. Multiple vehicles. Headlights lit up the windows, long beams sliding across the walls like searchlights. They're here, Ruffy whispered. Hamid moved quickly. He grabbed the old recorder, the map, and Sajida's hand. They ducked into the back room, away from the windows. Sajida handed the flash drive to Ruffy. If anything happens, take this to Bilal. Promise me. Ruffy nodded, pocketing it. I will. Footsteps outside. Voices calling out, firm official. Hamid Sahib. Open up. We have questions about your land. This is a routine inspection. Hamid didn't answer. He looked through a crack in the wooden wall and saw uniforms. 3 men wearing jackets with government logos, flanked by others in plain clothes. And behind them stood a Sfand. His expression unreadable. They weren't asking. They were staging something. Then, without waiting for a reply, the front door was forced open. The men stormed in, shining flashlights in every corner. Hamid Khan. One of them barked. You are under investigation for tampering with state development property. Step outside. Sajida's breath caught in her throat. Hamid stood tall, stepping into the light. I haven't tampered with anything, he said calmly. This land is mine. And I have proof. Proof? The man sneered. The well was tested. Contaminated. Crops dying. Locals complaining. Sounds like sabotage to me. That's a lie, Sajida said sharply, stepping forward. You're making it up to steal our land. One of the plainclothes men smirked. That flash drive you had. Where is it now? Hamid didn't answer. But it was clear they knew everything. Someone had leaked it. The circle around them was tighter than they had feared. And then came the second twist, one that changed everything. A voice called out from behind the group. Deep, unfamiliar voice. That's enough. The men turned, confused. A tall figure stepped into the room, holding up a badge. Not a local one, this was from a federal agency. I've been following this case for 3 months, the man said. I've heard enough tonight to open an inquiry. He turned to Hamid. Mr. Khan, my name is Imran Qureshi. I'm with the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And I believe your land is sitting on a concealed water channel the state never declared. The room went silent. Asfan's face turned pale. Someone leaked those files from inside, the agent continued. And now we have them. This land wasn't just meant for development. It was being used to hide a backdoor deal between real estate firms and political actors. Your refusal to sell exposed their timeline. The men in uniform looked at each other nervously. But Imran wasn't done. He stepped closer to Hamid. We need your help to finish this. But it has to happen quietly. If they know we're moving, they'll cover their tracks. Hamid looked at Sajida, then back at the man. So you're saying it's not over? Imran shook his head. It's just beginning. And just like that, the stakes shifted again. Hamid was no longer just a farmer under pressure. He was the key witness in a growing storm, one that stretched far beyond the cracked soil of his small farm. And as the lights dimmed again and the storm outside began to ease, one thing became painfully clear. The fight wasn't just for land anymore. It was for the truth. And the cost of that truth could be everything. Hamid never imagined the final battle for his land would play out in a dusty courtroom, far from the neem tree he once sat under every morning. Weeks had passed since the night of the storm. The media had caught hold of the story after Bilal, using the flash drive Rafi delivered, leaked the full details to a trusted journalist. The footage of heavy machinery digging on Hamid's land during the rain, the forged documents tied to Al Noor development, and the audio recordings of veiled threats. Everything had gone public. Suddenly, the forgotten farmer was no longer forgotten. But fame came with its own weight. Hamid was called to testify. Sajida, once afraid, stood beside him the entire time. Her calm voice breaking hearts as she described how they'd lived in fear, how neighbors turned away, and how they held on to the truth even when it felt like no one would ever believe them. Asfand was arrested a few days before the hearing. It was Rafi's statement that sealed it. Though the betrayal had cut deep, Asfand finally broke. In a closed-door session, he confessed everything: the bribes, the threats, the fake reports. He had tried to stop, but once he was in, there was no way out. That's what he had believed, at least. His confession revealed names Hamid had never heard: investors, officials, even a senior land commissioner. Imran Qureshi and his agency launched full-scale raids. More arrests followed. Public opinion shifted. Protesters gathered outside the court in support of small farmers across the region. "Hamid's fight is our fight," one of the banners read. The media started calling it the silent struggle that spoke. Finally, on the day of the verdict, Hamid stood outside the courtroom, the sunlight warm on his face. A crowd gathered behind him. The judge's ruling was firm. All illegal claims on the land were revoked. The development project was frozen. And most importantly, Hamid's rights to his farm were fully restored and protected under emergency agricultural preservation laws. Sajida cried quietly, leaning into Hamid's shoulder. Rafi stood beside them, uncertain, still burdened by his brother's choices, but no longer alone. Bilal clapped Hamid on the back, grinning like a proud brother. Even Imran, usually all business, allowed himself a smile. Should have ended there. But it didn't. 3 days later, back on the farm, Hamid received an unexpected visitor, an elderly man with sharp eyes and an old satchel. He introduced himself as Farouk, a retired government surveyor. "I read your story," he said, "and I thought you deserved to know something." He opened the satchel and pulled out a faded file. Inside was a hand-drawn map, older than any Hamid had seen. It showed the original land divisions before the canal was buried. At the center of it all was a mark, right where Hamid's well stood. "This," Farouk said, "wasn't just a water channel. It was a connector. Underground water passed from here to 2 other villages. But during partition, documents were lost, and when things settled again, no one cared. Your land wasn't just valuable. It was central. And some people, they knew that all along." Hamid stared at the old map, his heart heavy. "So all this time they weren't just trying to steal my farm. They were trying to control the flow of water for half the region." Farouk nodded. If they had succeeded, they could have redirected it, sold it, controlled every crop in miles. The final twist cut deeper than anything before. It hadn't been just greed. It was control. And the only thing that stopped them was a man who refused to sign. Later that evening, Hamid stood near the edge of his field. The neem tree rustled gently in the breeze, and the soil, for the first time in months, felt calm beneath his feet. The battle was over. But the war for truth, for land, for dignity, it would never truly end. And yet, as he looked out over his fields, now full of young green shoots pushing up toward the sky, he felt something return that had been missing for a long time. Hope. Because even in silence, even when forgotten, one farmer's struggle had reminded the world that the land remembers. And so do the people. In the weeks that followed the court's decision, things began to shift in quiet but meaningful ways. The village, once gripped by silence and suspicion, started breathing again. Neighbors who had looked the other way now came by with warm food, or to help Hamid repair parts of the house damaged during the storm. No one said it outright, but their eyes spoke an apology, one born not from guilt alone, but from realizing how close they had come to losing something they hadn't even known they still had: their sense of community. Sajida resumed her work at the local school, and for the first time, she felt proud when students asked her about the news reports. They had seen their teacher on TV standing beside her father, calm and brave. It wasn't about fame. It was about dignity. About reclaiming a story that had nearly been erased. She now used their experience to teach about land rights, honesty, and courage, reminding her students that even the quietest voice can matter when spoken with truth. Bilal, always restless, had found a new purpose. He started organizing community meetings, helping farmers understand the documents they often signed without reading, teaching them how to check for forged records and who to contact if things felt off. What had once been a personal battle had become a shared mission. His laughter returned, louder than ever, but now laced with something deeper: gratitude. Rafi, still grappling with his brother's betrayal, decided to stay back in the village for a while. He took a part-time job at the local records office, quietly working to digitize old files and cross-check land maps. He didn't say much, but every time he passed Hamid in the village center, he nodded respectfully, the unspoken understanding between them slowly growing into something like trust. As for Hamid, he returned to his land. The days were long, but the soil had healed. The crops were slow, as always, but steady. There was something deeply satisfying in the sound of the breeze moving through wheat stalks, and the soft hum of water trickling near the edge of the field. The well, once thought to be cursed or useless, had been reinforced, and its water now fed not just Hamid's crops but 2 neighboring farms. The government, under pressure from the media and public, launched an audit of other disputed land projects. Dozens of small farmers across the province came forward with similar stories. Forced sales, fake signatures, missing files. Some of those cases were reopened. Hamid's testimony had become part of a larger investigation that reached far beyond his village. His story was not just his anymore. It had become a spark. One afternoon, a young journalist visited again, the same one who had first broadcast the flash drive contents. She brought a copy of the newspaper with Hamid's photo on the front page. Underneath, the headline read, "The farmer who stood his ground." She handed it to him and smiled. "You may not know it, but you've changed how we tell stories." Hamid looked at the picture for a long time, then folded it carefully and tucked it away in the drawer next to his father's prayer beads and his mother's old clay lamp. It wasn't pride he felt, it was peace. But even peace has its moments of silence. One evening, as the sun set and the fields turned gold, Hamid walked to the edge of his property where the old boundary marker still stood. From there, he could see beyond the fields, toward the dirt road that had once brought strangers with promises and pens full of lies. Now that road was quiet. But in the distance, he noticed a small group of boys playing cricket with sticks and a rubber ball. One of them waved. Hamid smiled. He remembered the words Farouk had told him. The land remembers. It wasn't just about water or soil or even the deeds written in ink. It was about roots. Not the ones under the ground but the ones inside people. Roots that held firm, no matter the storms, no matter the silence. The final audit revealed that over 300 acres of land in nearby regions had been marked for illegal acquisition. With the evidence collected from Hamid's case, the network of corruption began to unravel. Arrests continued, but now there was something else: accountability. Real action, not just promises. In one last gesture of closure, a Sfand, from behind prison walls, wrote a letter to Hamid. It was brief. Just a few lines. "I thought I was protecting my family. But I lost myself. You reminded me what real strength looks like. I'm sorry." Hamid read it only once. Then he folded it and placed it in the same drawer with the newspaper and prayer beads. Not for anger. Not for forgiveness either. Just to remember that even the ones who fall can sometimes leave behind a lesson. The seasons turned. The fields bloomed. And Hamid, now recognized far beyond his village, remained the same quiet man under his neem tree. The cameras left. The reporters moved on. But the story stayed. And if you were to visit the village today, you might find a small sign at the edge of the field. Weathered, simple but clear. It reads, "This land speaks. And we listen." That is the legacy of the silent struggle. A reminder that even the most forgotten farmer can stir a nation, not with noise but with truth. And sometimes what happens next isn't a shock. It's a return. A return to what always mattered. Family, land, and the courage to stand for both.